interesting to me. It looks like the article about it came out early in the year, back in April of this year, 2019, and it was actually kind of a follow-on from a series of articles that this group called ProPublica, which I think maybe a lot of people listening to this maybe know exactly who they are. I wasn't familiar with them, but they're a not-for-profit media agency that does news. They were. I did some Google research to see that they were being cited by NBC and other news organizations as well. So they appear to be kind of in the mix of known and respected news agencies. But they anyway, what they're reporting on is mostly factual anyway, and it was. Just something I wasn't aware of, that apparently TurboTax or Intuit and perhaps H&R Block, I think they cited as well, but apparently these tax software businesses, tax preparation businesses, primarily on the individual tax return preparation end, have had a deal with the IRS that if they provide a free version of their software for people who meet certain criteria, so people who are under income levels, and the free version, AJ, you did the air quotes because it's like, well, apparently it's like a bare bones version, and most people would need add-ons in order to actually get real use out of it. And the other criticism on this is that they provide it, but then they don't advertise it well, so a lot of people don't even know it's there. But anyway, the thing is, they have a deal in place with the IRS, a letter of understanding that if they provide those free versions, then the IRS, the federal government, will not create their own software for taxpayers to use, right? And that being that as technology has been developing and it's easier and easier for tax returns to be done by technology, the obvious question in our society at this point is, why is the government making us spend all this time and money with other corporations' software and tools to prepare tax returns when the government already has a lot of the information, right? Yes. So, I mean, that's part of what it comes down to. It's like, well, if the government was to actually have a website or a software that prepares your tax return, they could pre-populate it with all the information they already have. Is kind of one of the thoughts, things that would be on your W-2s, or if you're a contractor, may come to you in your 1099s, and if you're an investor, you may have K-1s, and all this kind of stuff that goes into your tax returns. You have mortgage interest statements that go, all this stuff gets filed with the IRS, so they have it, and they could just auto put it into the tax return and save you some time and effort of trying to make sure you got it right. And so anyway, so the first thing I didn't know was that there was this deal in place, but the second piece of it is that these companies, the company that owns TurboTax, of course, is Intuit, but these companies have been lobbying Congress to essentially prevent the IRS or the federal government from rolling out a system that does tax returns for people in that way. And so the nature of the dispute, or the nature of the lobbying, has been to say, well, I guess the way it relates to this agreement, which is the politics of it, right, is that the agreement kind of gives members of Congress cover for arguing on behalf of these companies, right? So the Congress, the people in Congress have been lobbied by these companies. They've gotten campaign donations from these companies, and so they're basically arguing that the government should not get into the business or into the practice of creating its own tax software for people to use. And by the way, they get the cover of saying, by the way, we don't need this because these companies provide it for free. That agreement becomes the cover that they can use, right? So, just something I wasn't aware of and thought I'd throw out there and get your thoughts on it.
Well, I was surprised too, because I thought that the IRS e-file free online thing and then follow-up state filing would have been in place already. So, in fact, I read the same article and I was shocked that this was I shouldn't say shocked, because spoiler alert, the AICPA and our Association of Accountants lobby all the time to keep the tax code as mucky and muddy as it is, because we make a lot of money off of then interpreting those rules and providing clients with answers to that.
I'm sure the AICPA wouldn't say it that way, but sure, yeah.
I mean, you know, if you want the skinny on it, you know, I'm not gonna bullshit you. That's literally what they do. So I guess it wasn't surprising, but what was surprising is I feel like the IRS is like, I don't know, 50% of the way there anyway. They have the information.
Yeah.
If you go, you can no longer just print out a PDF. It's a fillable PDF that they have. So, I mean, you have the forms already in digital form. So, I mean, the IRS and the fact that making an online app to file your taxes is probably not that difficult in 2019, 2020. So it's really, I think, you know, it's probably up to the lobbyists at this point to when that will happen. Either that or a dollar amount savings that somebody could justify to the IRS before I think we'll see that switch on.
Yeah, and I just thought it was really interesting reading the article just because at first I was upset about the idea of it not being free, right? That's the obvious thing to get upset about. But as Tyee said, I think the more interesting piece there is the idea that the government has the information available about your income from other sources and that it's just part of the process that you are not allowed to then see that information from them until you're supposed to file a return, which then has all that information. So I think the idea of having that be available is paramount to getting returns right. You know, I don't see any benefit to the IRS hiding that.
Well, yeah, and I think, but it's there is an interesting philosophical thing going on here, right? Because currently the way it is the IRS has that information, but they don't necessarily connect it to each other, right? So it's not just that they're not making it available to you; they're not connecting it in every way that you might think they could on their side anyway, right? So, you know, I think we know that they do connect things like W-2s and 1099s, because if you just leave certain things off your tax return, you'll get a notice automatically. But you know, we call these matching programs. There isn't a universal matching program that matches every single thing that the IRS has to what hits your tax return yet, as far as I know. And you know, if it seems like that could change, but I think that brings you to the philosophical point: is that we have what we call a self-assessed income tax system, right? And so I think kind of what some of the kind of more freedom fighters on this issue are kind of where they're taking this is they're pointing out, well, if the system becomes that the IRS has a website or a software, an app or whatever that is pre-populated by them basically taking all this information in and matching it up ahead of time, you're taking it from a self-assessed system closer to a government assessed system. And is that the country we want to live in? Is that the, you know, where, because right now it's basically we self-assess and we say, believe me, this is what it is. And the government is supposed to believe us, you know, subject to audit. And then they can audit us, but they only get so much budget, and you know, Congress keeps a tight rein on those purse strings. So there's only so much budget and so much resources the IRS has available. So the current system, de facto, you know, requires the government to trust the citizens to fill their taxes correctly, subject to a limited amount of audit that is limited by the budget which Congress controls. You know, and so, and so, kind of buried in that whole thing is the we don't have to trust the citizens anymore, right? You know, do we want the government to basically say, forget trust, we have the information, we're going to have a system that brings it all together for you ahead of time and closer to the government just assessing the tax based on the information they have without any trust. And I think there's a philosophical debate buried in that somewhere. I personally, I'm okay with that. I don't care. I mean, you know, just because it's, I'm willing to give up some amount of that kind of freedom for efficiency's sake, I think. But
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's part of it.
Do you think that then thinking about that's an interesting point, because I hadn't even think of that. But do you think I know one of the big debates on like the healthcare thing was Medicare for all and how Canada is like that, right? There is small private, you know, doctors there, but mostly it's government run, and people talk about how inefficient and overbooked it is and everything. But so when the debate came up in America, the way they kind of said, well, the initial plan was for the Healthcare Act to offer a governmental option and then offer a public option. And eventually the government option went away, and they just went with a private marketplace with government subsidized healthcare, right, as the other option. So I'm wondering if a similar situation in this tax thing, where if the IRS comes out with a free file program, then can you encourage, I guess, the self-reporting side by allowing the private sector to then continue that free tax filing? And what it would do is it would force those companies like Intuit and Tax Act and all those other ones that offer free, air quotes here, free tax filings, to then actually offer free tax filings for Americans. And they're probably going to, economy of scale, they've already been doing this.
Yeah.
They're just putting a price tag on it for you to file. Like, you want to file your state return? That's $25. Or you need to do a Schedule C business? Sorry, that's not included in the free tax filing. You need to give us an extra $10. Something like that.
That's what they currently do, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that was what they currently do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that would maybe bridge that political divide between somebody saying, this is America and the government's not going to have all my information, whereas like, hey, sorry to tell you, they already have that information. They just be
Yeah.
populating it. But do you guys think it would, the offset of the private company still being viable would then offset that political divide?
I think it would, because I think that once the government option is up and running and we can see all the ineptitude of the government at work in that place, then people would go running to
Right.
private answers.
Well, I think it is like a lot of other things like this where there is a public option. Then you get into the debate, the philosophical question of how does this play into inequality in society, right? Mm-hmm. Because you can predict what's going to happen is that the 99% is using the public option and the 1% is using the paid option, and presumably the 1% using the paid option is doing so because the answer that you get from the paid option is more optimal from a tax standpoint, that they actually save more tax dollars. So now it's like, now we're doubling down on the inequality, right? Because it's like, well, I mean, and that's already true to
Right.
some extent, right? I mean, it's already true that those, high net worth folks and companies and businesses that can afford professional, highly qualified tax advisors probably save more money. Not probably, given I've been in the profession, I'd say for sure they save more money than those who don't have the advisors on the average, right? And so, I mean, that is an equality issue because, and it's circular, right? Because it's not only are people of different income levels being served in a disparate way, but the nature of it means that the people with the higher level of service that are paying for it are actually putting less into the coffers
Right.
right? So yeah, that's got a lot of interesting implications to it.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, spoiler alert, it is already happening. From a corporate and a personal tax standpoint, that 1% that can afford to deploy a team of accountants that know international tax, state tax, local tax, business tax, all those things that you talk about, and any kind of little benefit that they can find in the tax code for you, or structurally wise, structuring businesses so that you can shed a tax kind of liability. That's all very intricate stuff, and it is, inequality swings toward that 1%, and the 99% just kind of have to go with the status quo and what they can find on Google, and not through the IRS code or through years of experience that you would pay for that. So do you think that then that exponentially would ramp up that 1% advantage in the situation of when, if taxes were free via the IRS and the public paid option is still there? Do you think that would make it more?
It seems like it would, because I think right now there aren't great free options, right? That it's not the common way to do it necessarily. If you have some money to at least pay for software to walk you through with a questionnaire and a process and help you identify potential deductions and things like that. I mean, that's the thing, is like, if you had a public option, if you had a free IRS version would it be like TurboTax? Would the software actually ask you, hey, let's see if we can help maximize your deductions, right? I mean, I don't know if the IRS version would actually do that, right? So that's kind of that would be an interesting interesting caveat to how that all works. So yeah, I definitely think it highlights that. But I also feel compelled to build off something you said in terms of, as a tax strategist, I think a lot of times people think about that advantage is, oh, well, that tax planner is going to come up with this great deduction or this credit or something that's going to immediately save me taxes. But it also works in a different way that's a little less obvious, and that is, it may be that the tax strategist or the professional tax preparer is ensuring that in the complex scenario like what you talked about, where you've got complex issues, maybe you're operating internationally or whatever, that you're actually meeting the compliance requirements so that you're not having to circle back and pay penalties and interest and refile fees and eat up a bunch of management time and tax preparation fees to redo returns, amend returns, make corrections because you find out later that the way you were doing it was wrong. So I think that the advantage that the 1% ultimately will have is not just this idea that, oh, maybe they find a tax deduction that saves them immediate cash that other people don't have. It's also just ensuring that they're not. I think what we're talking about is that their process would be more streamlined and less likely to have redos,
Right.
less likely to have the problems with redoing and finding out you did things wrong and having to revision, which is very common in the small business individual environment where things are starting to get complex and you're working with tax advisors who don't necessarily have the skill set. You're not paying for enough skills to handle your situation. That's kind of the hidden cost of it, is that when you get into dealing with the redos later on.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think it's important to think about just from an individual taxpayer perspective that the existence of the standard deduction versus the itemized deduction is sort of the IRS's way of having something similar to this, where they're saying, okay, we have a version of your tax return where we don't feel you're going to need a preparer. It's simpler. We can just focus on, not having to show all the details. And then if you believe you have a lot of deductions, you can use a preparer and get a set of itemized deductions that ultimately works out in your favor. But I could just see how the IRS had set that up as something similar to a free tax software, just a dumbed down version of the return.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think probably what sways this is the technology advance. When it becomes so easy, and it already is so easy to put something online, but when it becomes, where your 3-year-old can make a web page or a secure web page or something like that, and we're almost there, I think that's probably when this switch gets turned, and really the financial bonanza that's been going on in the e-file world of free taxes, air quotes again, is probably over at that point. And that's probably not too far away.
Yeah. Yep. I think you're right. Yeah. I mean, I think that, in the tax preparation world in general, we come full circle, because one of the things we talked about in a prior segment was automation, right? And I mean, tax preparation, especially for individuals, has been kind of one of those places where automation has been charging forward very quickly. And so, yeah, I think it's destined, whether it's the IRS that's providing the software or a third party providing the software, it's destined to just become more and more simple on that front with the amount of automation that's hitting it.
Well, that'll be interesting when Facebook and Instagram start offering free tax preparing, because they will go ahead and file your taxes for free as long as you give them the information regarding it. So now not only do they have your name, address, and phone number, but they also have then your net worth, your yearly salary, who your dependents are,
Sure.
who
Wow.
your
Yeah.
wife is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so I think that's probably, if you want to talk about, Google, why not? Google owns all your other information, so does Facebook. Why shouldn't they own your taxes? So that's the next That's my next company venture. Will be an arm of that will be bought by Facebook.
Yes.
I'd like to get involved.
Okay, we can talk
great.
after the podcast
Okay.
on what the initial
Perfect.
investment will be.
Yes.
That's great.